The unexpected inheritance. Ethan Voss never expected to inherit anything. He was just an ordinary cargo pilot, working small jobs to survive. But today, everything changed. The message arrived in the middle of his shift, a formal transmission from the Galactic Inheritance Office. He almost ignored it, thinking it was a scam. But when he opened the file, a hologram of a serious-looking AI notary appeared. "Ethan Voss, you are the legal heir of Silas Voss," the AI said in a flat voice. Ethan frowned. Uncle Silas. He hadn't seen the man since childhood. His parents always warned him to stay away from Silas, calling him a reckless space trader with dangerous secrets. Now, the man was dead, and he had left something behind. "You have inherited a property asset, a small sum of credits, and a biological entity," the AI continued. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Biological entity. A second hologram appeared, and Ethan's blood turned cold. A woman stood before him, her wrists and ankles chained. She had glowing, silver-blue skin, delicate features, and deep violet eyes. Her long, silken hair shimmered under the dim light. She was alien. A text file popped up. Name: Alara. Species: Nixari. Status: slave. Ethan's stomach twisted. A slave. This had to be a mistake. He shook his head. "No, I don't own people. I want nothing to do with this." The AI blinked. "Your inheritance is legally binding. If you reject it, the asset will be transferred to the nearest trading hub for auction." Ethan's chest tightened. Auction. That meant Alara would be sold to the highest bidder. He had seen the kind of people who bought slaves. Mercenaries, warlords, corrupt nobles. If he walked away, she would end up with someone far worse. He looked at Alara again. She stared back, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her eyes. Not fear, not gratitude. Something else. Ethan swallowed hard. He had no idea what he was getting into. But one thing was clear. He couldn't let her be sold. "I free her," Ethan said. The AI glitched. Invalid request. Releasing a legally inherited asset requires approval from Galactic Trade Law Office. Request denied. Ethan cursed. "What do you mean denied? She's a person." Alara finally spoke, her voice soft but sharp. "You don't understand what you're doing." Ethan turned to her. "I understand enough. I won't let them sell you." Alara shook her head, her violet eyes narrowing. "You think freeing me will fix everything. No, it will only make things worse, for both of us." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, an alarm blared through the ship. His comm panel flashed red. Incoming transmission, from an unknown source. He hesitated and answered. A deep, cold voice filled the cockpit. "Ethan Voss, hand over the Nixari, and we'll let you live." Ethan's breath caught. Who were they? And how did they know? He glanced at Alara. She remained calm, but her fingers clenched into fists. Ethan had a bad feeling. This was just the beginning. The choice that shakes the stars. Ethan's heart pounded as the cold, mechanical voice echoed through his cockpit. "Ethan Voss, hand over the Nixari, and we'll let you live." The message came from an unknown source, but he didn't need to know their name to understand what was happening. Someone powerful was already after Alara. And now, they were after him too. He turned to Alara. She was unnervingly calm, standing with her wrists still bound, her violet eyes locked onto his. "Who are they?" Ethan asked. Alara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Finally, she whispered, "The first of many." Ethan's stomach twisted. He didn't have time for cryptic warnings. He opened the ship's comms and forced his voice to remain steady. "I don't know who you are, but I don't take orders from strangers. She's not your property." There was a pause. Then the voice spoke again, colder this time. Wrong answer. The ship lurched violently as something struck the hull. An energy torpedo. Alarms blared. Ethan grabbed the controls, barely managing to stabilize the ship. He pulled up the radar screen and saw them. Two sleek black fighters, no insignia, moving in fast. His ship was just a cargo vessel. It wasn't built for combat. Alara watched him carefully. "You are going to run." Ethan gritted his teeth. "If I can." He slammed the thrusters forward, sending the ship into a sharp dive. The G-forces pressed him into his seat, but he had no choice. The fighters opened fire again. Laser rounds streaked past, barely missing the engines. Alara swayed slightly but didn't fall. "If you keep running, they will chase you forever." Ethan barked a bitter laugh. "Yeah, and what's your plan?" Alara held up her wrists, the metal shackles still glowing with containment energy. "Free me." Ethan hesitated. He didn't know what she could do. He didn't even know if he could trust her. But right now, he was out of options. With one hand on the controls, he reached down and grabbed his plasma cutter. He activated it and pressed it against the shackles. Sparks flew as the restraints melted away. The second the cuffs hit the floor, something changed. Alara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Her silver-blue skin began to glow, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. The air in the cockpit grew heavy, like an unseen force was pressing down on everything. Ethan swallowed hard. "What are you?" Alara opened her eyes. Outside, the attacking fighters suddenly veered off course, as if something had just forced their systems to malfunction. One of them spun wildly before slamming into a nearby asteroid, exploding on impact. The second ship wobbled and slowed. Then, without firing another shot, it turned and retreated into the darkness of space. Ethan stared. "What just happened?" he demanded. Alara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I warned you. You don't know what you've done." The ship's alarms finally stopped. The enemy was gone. For now. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to process what had just happened. "You did that, didn't you?" Alara didn't deny it. Instead, she walked toward him, her gaze sharp. "You freed me. That means you have chosen your path. Now, you must live with it." Ethan rubbed his temples. He didn't like how she made it sound like he had sealed his own fate. Before he could respond, the comm system flickered again. Another incoming transmission. But this time, it wasn't a threat. The image of an old, battle-worn man appeared on the screen. His deep-set eyes and scarred face told Ethan he had seen far too many wars. "Ethan Voss," the man said, his voice filled with grim authority. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. You have no idea who she really is, do you?" Ethan froze. Alara sighed. "I was hoping we'd have more time." The man continued, his eyes locked onto Alara. "Nexari royalty were supposed to be extinct. If she's alive, the entire balance of power in the galaxy is about to change." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "What do you mean, royalty?" Alara finally turned to face him directly. Her glowing eyes flickered with something deep, something ancient. "I am not just a slave," she said softly. "I am the last heir to the Nexari throne." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. Alara took a slow step forward. "And now, because of you, the whole galaxy will come for us. The hunt begins." Ethan stared at Alara, his mind reeling. Royalty. The last heir to an extinct throne. He had thought he was just saving a woman from slavery, but now he was caught in the middle of something much bigger. The transmission from the scared man still flickered on his screen. His deep-set eyes were sharp, like a predator who had seen too many wars and survived them all. "Listen to me, Voss," the man said. "You don't understand what you've done. That woman standing next to you, she's the key to an empire that was erased from history. And now, because she's alive, the galaxy will come for you both." Ethan's gut twisted. "Who are you?" "Captain Darius Wren, former commander of the Nexari warfleet." Ethan frowned. "That's impossible. The Nexari were wiped out centuries ago. There's nothing left of them. Darius's expression darkened. You're wrong. The Nixari weren't just wiped out, boy. They were hunted. And those who survived. He glanced at Alara. They were enslaved. Just like her. Ethan turned to Alara, but she didn't say anything. Her face was unreadable, but her hands were clenched into fists. Darius continued. The Zephyr Syndicate won't stop until they have her. And now, because you freed her, they'll hunt you, too. Ethan exhaled sharply. He had so many questions, but one thing was clear. He was in over his head. He looked at Alara. Is he telling the truth? She met his gaze. Yes. A cold silence filled the cockpit. Then, suddenly, alarms blared. Ethan spun to his radar. Multiple ships incoming. Fast. Alara stepped closer to the console, her violet eyes narrowing. They found us. Darius's voice turned urgent. Listen, kid. You need to get out of there. Now. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the thrusters forward, sending the ship into a sharp dive just as 3 enemy ships burst into view. The first laser shot barely missed the cockpit. Alara grabbed the back of Ethan's chair, steadying herself. Where are we going? Ethan clenched his jaw, pulling up a star map. I have a safe house on Drax 4, Outer Rim. No official records. Alara didn't seem convinced. No place is safe anymore. Ethan ignored her and punched in the coordinates. The ship jumped into hyperspace just as another laser blast grazed the hull. Drax 4, a lawless refuge. The moment they dropped out of hyperspace, Ethan's ship rattled violently. He barely managed to land the vessel in the junkyard district of Drax 4, a lawless, crime-ridden planet where smugglers, ex-soldiers, and mercenaries disappeared when they needed to hide. As soon as the engines powered down, Ethan unbuckled and turned to Alara. We need to lay low, get supplies, figure out our next move. Alara gave a small, tired nod, but something in her expression told him she didn't believe in hiding. They stepped out into the dusty, neon-lit streets. Drax 4 was chaos. Mechanical vendors screamed out deals. Broken droids limped through the alleys, and criminals eyed them from the shadows. Ethan pulled his hood over his head, keeping close to Alara. Stay close. Don't trust anyone. Alara didn't answer, but she walked beside him with perfect composure, like she had been here before. They reached a weapons dealer's shop, where Ethan bought forged IDs, emergency fuel cells, and a compact plasma pistol. The dealer, a 4-armed alien with scarred scales, eyed Alara. Nice catch, human. Nixari, ha. You selling? Ethan's fingers tightened around his blaster. No. The alien chuckled. Shame. You'd be rich. Ethan didn't respond. He grabbed the supplies and pulled Alara outside. She finally spoke. You can't keep doing that. Ethan frowned. Doing what? Getting angry every time someone treats me like an object. Her violet eyes flickered. This is how the galaxy sees me. Ethan exhaled. Well, the galaxy is wrong. Alara studied him for a long moment before looking away. But then, Ethan noticed something. A man was watching them from across the street. Tall, armed, dangerous. Alara saw him too. Bounty hunter, she whispered. The man spoke into a small comm device, his lips barely moving. Ethan knew what that meant. He was calling backup. They needed to move. Now. The chase. Ethan grabbed Alara's wrist and pulled her down a narrow alley. They moved fast, weaving through the maze-like streets. But the bounty hunters were faster. Within minutes, 4 of them closed in. They had cybernetic implants, tactical armor, and weapons designed for taking people alive. Ethan cursed and yanked out his pistol. He fired at the first hunter, a perfect shot to the shoulder. The man stumbled back, but the other 3 kept coming. Alara suddenly stopped running. Ethan turned. What are you doing? We have to. A pulse of blue energy erupted from Alara's hands. The nearest bounty hunter was thrown back into a wall so hard his armor cracked. Ethan froze. Alara had barely moved, but the air shimmered around her. Her power was awakening. The remaining 2 hunters hesitated. Alara stepped forward, her voice deadly calm. "Run, before I change my mind." One of them turned and fled immediately. The last one hesitated, until Alara lifted her hand slightly. The air rippled again, and the bounty hunter bolted. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Remind me never to make you mad." Alara didn't respond. Her expression was unreadable. But Ethan saw something in her eyes, something deep, something dark. She was remembering something, and he had a feeling it wasn't good. The assassin's offer. The bounty hunters had fled, but Ethan knew that wouldn't last. Draxfor was a place where secrets didn't stay hidden for long. If bounty hunters had found them this quickly, more were already on their way. Alara was quiet as they moved through the crowded, neon-lit streets. Her face was unreadable, but Ethan could feel the tension in the air. She had used her powers, and from the way she had looked afterward, like something had been unlocked inside her. He had a bad feeling she wasn't telling him everything. Ethan led them into a rundown mechanic's shop, owned by an old friend. Jex, a cybernetically enhanced mechanic, raised a metallic eyebrow as they walked in. "Voss," Jex muttered, "you look like you just kicked a hornet's nest." "You have no idea," Ethan replied. "I need a place to lay low, somewhere off the grid." Jex leaned back, rubbing his metal jaw. "I can hide you for a while, but Draxfor ain't safe. Word spreads fast." His eyes flicked to Alara, "especially when you're carrying a Nixari royal around." Ethan tensed. "You know." Jex chuckled. "Everyone knows." He gestured toward a flickering holoscreen in the corner. Ethan turned, and his blood ran cold. There it was, a live bounty alert. Ethan Voss, wanted for the illegal release of Nixari property. Reward: 50 million credits, dead or alive. Alara's name wasn't even mentioned, just his. Ethan exhaled sharply. "They're making me the target." "Of course," Jex said. "You're easier to catch than her. Every bounty hunter in the sector will be after you now." Alara folded her arms. "They think killing him will make me surrender." Ethan shot her a look. "Would it?" She held his gaze. "No." Before Ethan could respond, the door behind them slammed open. Jex's cybernetic arm moved fast, reaching for a hidden weapon. But then he froze. So did Ethan. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, clad in dark armor, eyes like burning coals. The room seemed to lose warmth as he stepped forward. The air felt heavier. Jex swallowed hard. "Void Reaper," he whispered. Ethan's pulse spiked. He had heard that name before. Varrock the Void Reaper, the deadliest assassin in the galaxy. He had no loyalty to any government, no allegiance to any syndicate. He only followed one rule: whoever paid the most got the kill. And right now, someone had paid him to kill Ethan. Varrock's voice was like gravel. "You're coming with me, Voss." Ethan stepped back, hand moving toward his blaster. "Not happening." Varrock tilted his head slightly. "You can fight, but you won't win." Alara moved in front of Ethan. Her silver-blue skin glowed softly, her presence suddenly sharp and dangerous. "You work for the Zyphar Syndicate?" she asked coldly. Varrock's lips curled in amusement. "No, I work for the highest bidder." Ethan's muscles tensed. "Then I assume you're here to collect the bounty." Varrock didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Alara, then back at Ethan. "Not yet." Ethan frowned. "Not yet." Varrock stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have an offer." Ethan's gut twisted. An assassin offering a deal. That never ended well. Varrock continued. "The Syndicate wants you dead because they're afraid of what happens if Alara stays free." His glowing eyes flickered toward her. But I know something they don't. Alara narrowed her eyes. And what's that? Varrock's voice turned deadly serious. They don't just want you back. They want to control you. Ethan frowned. Control her? How? Varrock exhaled slowly, then said the words that changed everything. They have a mind control device. It was built for the Nixari. If they capture her, they won't just imprison her. They'll turn her into their weapon. Silence. Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Alara went completely still. Her violet eyes darkened, as if she already knew what he was talking about. Ethan's throat felt dry. You're telling me that if they get their hands on her, they'll make her their puppet, Varrock finished. And not just her. Any Nixari left in the galaxy. Jek swore under his breath. This is worse than I thought. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. This just kept getting worse. Alara finally spoke, her voice eerily calm. You came here to kill Ethan. Now you're offering information. Why? Varrock smirked. Because I don't work for the Syndicate. I work for money. And right now, someone else paid me more to keep you alive. Ethan's chest tightened. Who? Varrock shrugged. That's not your concern. What matters is this. I can get you inside the Syndicate's facility, where they keep the device. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Why would you help us? Varrock smiled slightly. Because I enjoy chaos. Alara studied him carefully, then finally turned to Ethan. This is our chance, she said. We destroy the device before they can use it. Ethan hesitated. He had spent his whole life avoiding trouble, running from danger. Now, he was about to break into the most feared syndicate in the galaxy, to destroy a weapon he hadn't even known existed. He took a deep breath, then looked at Alara. Let's do it. The final betrayal. The plan was simple. Get in. Destroy the device. Get out. At least, that's how Varrock made it sound. But Ethan knew better. Nothing about breaking into the Zypher Syndicate's most heavily guarded facility was simple. The three of them, Ethan, Alara, and Varrock, sat in the cramped cargo hold of a stolen transport ship, heading straight toward the Syndicate's headquarters on Exelon 7. Ethan checked his blaster for the 10th time. Let me get this straight, he muttered. We sneak in disguised as supply contractors, get past a security force that probably shoots first, asks questions never. Then we find this mind control device and blow it up, all before they realize we're inside. Varrock smirked, more or less. Alara sat quietly, staring at the floor. She had barely spoken since they left Drax 4. Ethan nudged her. You okay? She looked at him, her glowing violet eyes unreadable. Do you know why the Syndicate wiped out my people? Ethan hesitated. No. Alara exhaled. Because they feared us. The Nixari weren't just warriors. We were something else. Something they couldn't control. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, They will never stop hunting me. Ethan wanted to say something, to tell her she wasn't alone, that they would get through this together. But before he could, the ship's console beeped. They had arrived. The infiltration. The Syndicate's headquarters loomed ahead, a massive structure of black steel, hidden beneath Exelon 7's swirling storms. The transport ship docked without issue, their stolen clearance codes working perfectly. See, Varrock said as the landing pad sealed behind them. Told you it'd be easy. Ethan didn't reply. He gripped his blaster and followed Varrock through the corridors. The facility was cold, sterile. Every wall pulsed with energy. Security drones patrolled in silent formation, scanning every inch of the facility. Ethan kept his head down, moving past heavily armed guards who barely spared them a glance. Alara walked beside him, too calm, too quiet. Then, finally, they reached the control center. Varrock disabled the security feed with a single swipe on a hacked datapad. All right, lovebirds, We got 10 minutes before they noticed something's wrong. Ethan ignored the comment and turned to Alara. Where's the device? Alara closed her eyes, her body glowing faintly. After a few moments, she whispered, below us. Ethan raised an eyebrow. How do you? Before he could finish, Alara lifted her hand, and the metal floor beneath them trembled. Then it split open. Ethan stumbled back, his mind racing. You could do that this whole time. Alara didn't answer. She dropped through the opening, landing silently below. Varrock smirked. I like her. Ethan groaned. Shut up and move. The mind control device. The room below was massive, filled with rows of containment pods. And inside each pod, a Nixari. Ethan's breath hitched. Hundreds of them, their bodies restrained, their glowing eyes dim. Alara stood in the center of the room, staring at the pods in horror. They were never wiped out, she whispered. They were taken. Ethan clenched his fists. The Syndicate had been lying to the entire galaxy. Then, at the far end of the room, he saw it. The device. A towering monolith of black metal, humming with energy. A dozen scientists stood around it, typing away at control panels. This is it, Varrock said. He pulled out a detonator. Let's blow it and go. But Alara didn't move. She stared at the device, her expression unreadable. Something was wrong. Ethan stepped closer. Alara. Her violet eyes flickered. She looked afraid. Varrock sighed. No time for drama, princess. Either we destroy it, or they turn your people into puppets. Alara suddenly whispered. They already have. Then one of the pods opened. A figure stepped out. Tall. Nixari. But something was wrong. His eyes glowed red instead of violet. His movements were unnatural. Too perfect, too controlled. Ethan's stomach dropped. They're already using it, he realized. Alara staggered back. This is what they wanted me for. The controlled Nixari turned toward them. He moved too fast. 1 second standing still, the next lunging forward. Varrock fired first. A clean headshot. It didn't even slow him down. The Nixari hit Varrock so hard he crashed into a console, sparks flying. Ethan fired next. 3 shots to the chest. Nothing. The Nixari grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Ethan choked, kicking uselessly. Then suddenly, the Nixari stopped. Alara was glowing brighter now. Her hand was raised, her eyes locked onto the controlled Nixari. And then his red eyes flickered back to violet. For a moment, the real Nixari was back. Princess, he choked. Then, just as quickly, the glow vanished, and his body collapsed, lifeless. Ethan gasped for air. What the hell just happened? Alara trembled. The device doesn't just control them, it burns them out. Varrock groaned, pushing himself up. We have to move. Now. Alara clenched her fists. No, we finish this. She turned toward the device. Her whole body burned with energy. And then the alarms blared. The doors slammed open. A voice filled the room. Step away from the device. Ethan turned, and his blood went ice cold. It was the leader of the Syndicate himself, flanked by dozens of armed guards. And he wasn't alone. He had brought backup, because standing beside him was Varrock, smirking, holding a gun to Ethan's head. The revolution begins. Ethan's heart pounded as the cold barrel of Varrock's blaster pressed against his head. The Void Reaper had betrayed them. Alara stood frozen, her silver-blue skin pulsing with light. The moment stretched, silent, deadly, until the leader of the Syndicate, a man draped in dark robes with cybernetic implants lacing his skull, took a step forward. You really thought you could destroy my machine? His voice was calm, too calm. Did you think we wouldn't see you coming? Alara's glowing eyes flicked to Varrock, her expression unreadable. You were working for them this whole time. Varrock smirked. Of course not. He pressed the blaster harder against Ethan's skull. I work for whoever pays the most. And right now, they're paying a lot. Ethan clenched his fists. You son of a... Save it, Varrock muttered. Alara's hands curled into fists, her entire body trembling. But it wasn't fear, it was rage. The syndicate leader, Dren Solas, clasped his hands behind his back, pacing toward Alara. You Nixari always had such a fascinating intensity. His eyes gleamed. That's why we had to break you. Control you. Alara didn't blink. Your people tried. And they failed. Solas chuckled. Not this time. This time, we have you. With a flick of his wrist, the mind control device behind him roared to life. Ethan winced as a sharp wave of static energy ripped through the air. The walls hummed, and every pod in the room glowed red. The trapped Nixari inside began to scream. Alara's eyes widened. She staggered back as an invisible force seemed to grab at her mind. Ethan watched in horror as her silver glow flickered, and for the first time, Alara looked afraid. Her body shook violently, her knees nearly buckling. And no. Solas smiled. Yes. Ethan saw pure terror in Alara's eyes. She was losing control. And that meant the syndicate was winning. Fighting against the machine. Ethan gritted his teeth. He wasn't going to let this happen. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. He turned his head slightly. Varrock. The assassin raised an eyebrow. What? Ethan moved. Fast. He slammed his elbow backward, catching Varrock in the ribs. The assassin stumbled, just for a second, but that was all Ethan needed. He grabbed Varrock's wrist, twisted it, and the blaster fired, straight into one of the guards. Panic erupted. Ethan lunged for his own weapon, rolling forward as blaster fire exploded around him. Varrock recovered fast. Bad move. Voss. But Ethan wasn't listening. He turned toward Alara. She was on her knees now, clutching her head as the device's power surged through her. The other Nixari in the pods were convulsing, their eyes flickering between red and violet. They were losing themselves. Solas laughed, watching it unfold. Ethan raised his blaster. Shut it down. Solas didn't even flinch. You think you can stop this? He gestured to the machine. This device is built to break the Nixari will. Soon, she'll be mine. And when she is, you'll be nothing but a forgotten fool who tried to play hero. Ethan snarled. Yeah, let's test that theory. And then he shot the control panel. The turning point. The moment the console exploded, sparks erupted everywhere. The device sputtered, faltered. The red glow flickered, then vanished. The Nixari stopped screaming. Alara gasped, her body jerking forward. Then she looked up, and her violet eyes burned. Solas's face twisted with rage. No. Alara rose to her feet. Ethan stepped back as he saw something shift in the air. The floor rumbled beneath them. Alara's entire body pulsed with energy, silver and white, pure and raw. The chains that had held her people for centuries were breaking. Solas snarled, raising his blaster. You. Alara lifted a hand. Solas flew backward, slamming into the wall with bone-crushing force. The guards opened fire. Too late. Alara unleashed a shockwave that sent them flying. Ethan barely had time to react as the entire facility began to collapse. The Nixari awakening. The containment pods shattered. Hundreds of Nixari, once trapped, now stood free. They turned toward Alara. Their eyes glowed with newfound strength. One by one, they dropped to one knee, heads bowed. Ethan's breath caught. They weren't just prisoners. They were her people. Alara's face hardened. For the first time, she truly looked like a queen. She turned to Ethan. You freed us. Ethan exhaled. Well, technically, you did the heavy lifting. A ghost of a smile flickered across her lips. Then, alarms blared. Varrock, blood dripping from his mouth, staggered to his feet. "I'd love to stay and chat," he muttered, "but we have company." Ethan turned. More syndicate forces were swarming toward the facility. Alara didn't hesitate. She turned to her people. "We end this. Now." The Nixari warriors rose, weapons drawn. The revolution had begun. The final battle begins. The battle outside was chaos. Ethan ran beside Alara as blaster fire ripped through the air. The Nixari, once broken and enslaved, now fought with a fury that shook the syndicate to its core. Ethan took down 2 soldiers with well-placed shots. Alara moved like lightning, her power tearing through enemy ranks. Solas was nowhere to be seen, coward. Ethan turned to Varrock, who was casually shooting a syndicate guard in the leg. "You working for us now?" Ethan asked. Varrock grinned. "Let's just say the syndicate stopped paying me." Ethan rolled his eyes. Convenient. But he didn't have time to argue. Because ahead of them, the syndicate's flagship was preparing to flee. And Alara. She was already moving toward it. The decision that shakes the galaxy. The syndicate's flagship loomed ahead, its massive hull cutting through the stormy skies of Exelon 7. Engines roared, shields flickered, and the last of the syndicate's forces scrambled to escape. Ethan sprinted beside Alara, dodging blaster fire. The battlefield around them was chaos. Nixari warriors tore through enemy ranks. Syndicate forces desperately tried to hold their ground, but they were losing. The revolution had begun. Ethan fired a shot over his shoulder, dropping a syndicate enforcer. He turned to Alara. "We have to get to that ship before Solas escapes." Alara's glowing violet eyes narrowed. "He's mine." She raised a hand, and the air around them trembled. The syndicate forces screamed as an invisible pulse of power ripped through them, sending them crashing into the wreckage of their own barricades. Varrock, casually firing his blaster beside Ethan, whistled. "Remind me never to get on her bad side." "You already did," Ethan muttered. Varrock smirked. "Exactly." Ethan rolled his eyes, but there was no time to argue. The flagship's thrusters ignited. Solas was escaping. Alara didn't hesitate. She ran straight toward the rising ship, her body glowing with raw energy. Ethan's heart pounded. "We're seriously doing this." Varrock grinned. "Oh, we're absolutely doing this." And with that, they chased after her. Storming the flagship, the ship's ramp was retracting when Alara leaped onto it with impossible grace. Ethan and Varrock were not so lucky. "Jump," Varrock shouted. Ethan didn't think. He just ran and leaped off the ground just as the ramp began to close. His fingers caught the edge, barely hanging on. Varrock grabbed his ankle. Ethan groaned. "Are you kidding me?" "You love this," Varrock muttered, hauling himself up. With a final heave, the 2 men rolled onto the ramp just as the ship lifted off. They had made it. Barely. Ethan sucked in a breath. "We really need a better plan." "Agreed," Varrock said, already getting to his feet. "Now let's go kill a crime lord." The final confrontation. The interior of the ship was sleek, cold, and metallic, lit by flickering red lights. Alarm sirens howled as syndicate enforcers rushed toward them. Ethan ducked behind a crate, firing precise shots as 3 guards fell. Alara didn't stop moving. She strode forward, hands glowing with pure energy, tearing through enemies with impossible speed. The ship shook violently. Outside, Nixari forces were attacking from the ground, trying to disable the engines. Solas was running out of time. Ethan pushed forward, following Alara through the ship's long corridors. Each step brought them closer to ending this. Finally, they'd reached the command bridge. And there he was, Dren Solas. The syndicate leader stood at the massive holo-display, his cybernetic implants flickering with data. He didn't look afraid. He looked amused. "You came all this way," Solas mused. "And for what?" He glanced at Alara. to reclaim a throne that no longer exists. Alara stepped forward, her expression cold. To end you. Solas chuckled. Bold words. But even with your power, you can't stop what's coming. Ethan gripped his blaster. And what exactly is coming? Solas's smirk grew. The Syndicate isn't just a gang of criminals, boy. We have governments in our pocket, entire fleets under our command. He spread his arms. Kill me, and the galaxy will descend into war. My death won't free your people. It'll turn them into hunted fugitives for eternity. Alara hesitated, and for the first time, Ethan saw doubt in her eyes. Solas took a step forward. Think, princess. You can destroy me, or you can take control. Rule the Syndicate. Command its power. Use it to rebuild your empire. Ethan's chest tightened. That's not who she is. Solas ignored him, eyes locked onto Alara. Isn't it? You felt it, didn't you? The power. The control. You could rule. You could burn the ones who enslaved you. Alara's fists clenched. She was listening. Ethan swallowed hard. He had to stop this. Alara, he said carefully, stepping forward. That's not the way. You told me the Nixari were different, that they weren't conquerors. Solas chuckled. That's a lie, she told herself. But the truth? She was born to rule. Alara's violet eyes flickered with uncertainty. Ethan's stomach twisted. She was torn. She had spent her whole life as a slave, hunted, powerless. And now, for the first time, she had the power to change everything. Ethan exhaled, and then he did something reckless. He lowered his blaster, and he walked right up to her. You don't need to rule them, Ethan whispered. You already won. Alara's eyes widened, and then she made her choice. With a slow breath, she turned away from Solas and toward her people. I am not a ruler, she said, voice steady. I am a liberator. Solas's expression darkened. So be it. He reached for his weapon. Alara moved faster. She lifted her hand, and Solas froze in place. Ethan saw it in the crime lord's eyes, the moment he realized he had lost. Then, Alara closed her fist. The room shook as a final pulse of energy ripped through Solas's body. His cybernetics short-circuited. His body convulsed. And then he collapsed. The Syndicate leader was dead. It was over. The aftermath. The battle outside ended soon after. With Solas gone, the remaining Syndicate forces scattered. The Nixari were free. Ethan stood beside Alara, looking over the ruined Syndicate flagship. You did it, he said. Alara didn't respond immediately. Her glowing eyes turned to him. You freed me, she said softly. Ethan swallowed. But before he could finish, Alara stepped closer, and she kissed him. Ethan's heart stopped. The moment was brief, but powerful. When she pulled away, her expression softened. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan let out a breath. You're welcome. Varrock, watching from the side, rolled his eyes. All right, lovebirds. What's next? Alara turned toward her people, toward the future. We rebuild. And as the first Nixari fleet rose into the skies, Ethan knew the galaxy would never be the same again.